Wake up. Wake up.
Hello and welcome, friends. My name is Jack Knoxville. I am so happy to have you join me on my first personal podcast. You are tuning into Hard Knocks, which is a podcast created by me to tell you more about my story and also to help you get connected a little bit better with all of the topics that are circling us these days. I just want to give you some personal insights and help you get to know me better. I am the founder and executive director of a national nonprofit called Trans Empowerment Project. There's so much to talk about. I'm so excited you're here. Thank you for tuning in today. First thing I want to do is acknowledge that this is October. And October, in case you don't know, is LGBTQIA History Month, which we are all a part of living history right now, which is fantastic. So we are also in the midst of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and midway through the month, we have National Coming Out Day. So I actually want to talk about most of these things because I got a lot to say and I want to help you all to get better connected as well. Especially when it comes to social justice, because, it's really hard, especially for people who are not a part of the LGBTQIA community, to understand what we're up against and what is going on around us. But more importantly is this relentless and ridiculous attack on trans lives that's been going on for years now. Mostly because people don't want to take the time to learn the truth about gender identity. Yo, come on now. So let's talk about this stuff because there is so much that we have at stake right now. We are 30-something days away from the elections. We have been dealing with massive amounts of misinformation. I mean, hell, today I was on Threads for just a little bit of time, and I can't even tell you the number of accounts that I came across who were just basically on Threads to create some divisive rhetoric. And it's pretty obvious when you have like 3 to 8 followers. If you've been on Threads, you've made 20 posts and you got 8 followers, you're full of shit. Sorry, not sorry. But I also want to talk really directly with all of you about the seriousness of what happens when, all of this anti-trans rhetoric, which really is misinformation, is growing. Let's talk about that, okay? Because I can tell you right now, for as somebody who is a part of the LGBTQIA community and somebody who has had to come out multiple times, it's hard, man. You know what? It's really hard. It's really hard to figure out who the hell you are, especially when it goes against all of the societal norms. And I mean, let's be real. Who wants to go against the norm in terms of who wants to take on the battle, right, between themselves and society? Who wants to risk losing their friends, their family, access to doctors? Who wants to risk getting their ass kicked at school? Like, who wants to go through that voluntarily? I mean, because let's be real. Some of us, we like to stir the pot a little bit. Let's be real. I mean, look, I had 9 piercings in my face at one point and all kinds of crazy colored hair because I loved it. I like to provoke thought, but what I don't like to provoke is hate and violence. And I think there's a very clear distinction that needs to be made there because, queer and trans people are not here to try to spread hate and bring in the devil and all that stuff. We are literally just existing. And because it's National Coming Out Day very soon, probably by the time I release this podcast, I'm going to share one of my own stories. This is my own national coming out story. Okay. So I was actually the first trans guy to run for political office anywhere in the Southern United States, which, was definitely no small feat, to say the least. However, what I will say is that it took a lot for me to get to that place where I was comfortable enough to even come out of the closet, let alone do so publicly. And I mean, I was somebody who got my ass kicked. I dealt with tremendous amounts of abuse in my house. I mean, my father was a white man who kidnapped me from my mother because he was mad that she left him. And then he proceeded to spend the next 35 years of my life trying to do everything he could to torture me. Which he later admitted was because my mom left him. And how dare she, as a multiracial woman, how the hell could she leave him? Because he was some kind of catch. This man was abusive, violent, vile, disturbed, disgusting. I mean, ruthless. There was nothing about him that was healed. There was no part of him that was trying to be better, do better, or even do good. He was always out for himself. In fact, a lot of ways, he really reminded me a lot of Trump. But when I first came out, I actually didn't even have a chance to come out. I was literally thrown out of the closet. And I say literally thrown out because what happened was when I was younger, before this thing called email came along, we used to actually write each other letters. So I had written a letter to my best friend who was living in Florida at the time, and told her that I was really thinking that I might be bisexual because we didn't have words like pansexual at the time, which is how I do identify in my sexuality. But yeah, I came out to her in a letter. She wrote me back. She was very supportive and very cool, which was amazing, especially in 1994. But my father and my stepmother, who was also a horrible, horrible human being, intercepted my mail, didn't actually really say much of anything to me about it. Although shortly after that, my father told me that he had to have surgery on his kidneys. And for the first time in years, I was getting the opportunity to go stay with my mother. Remember, as I said, this man kidnapped me and was keeping me from her. There's a whole lot of stuff that happened in that kidnapping story, but we'll get to that at some point, I'm sure, maybe in another episode. But for now. Anyway, so fast forward, I'm in high school. My father tells me he's got to get surgery on his kidneys. I'm going to go stay with my mom. I go do that. And so, a couple weeks goes by. I'm supposed to be going to my grandparents' house to get picked up by my dad because that was their drop-off point. So I'm waiting for my mom to take me. And she's taking me everywhere but my grandparents' house. And I was getting really anxious because I'm like, my dad's going to be pissed, man. So finally, my mom takes me back to my grandparents' house. My dad's not there. And I'm like, where's my dad? My grandfather says, oh, hey, you got 2 packages here. Let me go get them for you. So he comes out. He brings 2 boxes. I'm all excited. I'm like, ooh, packages. I open these boxes, right? There's a box of clothes, and there's a box that has my guitar in it. And I was so confused. And I looked at my grandfather. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I think you should sit down. So my grandfather sits down, takes out a piece of paper. My grandfather proceeds to read this letter outing me in front of my mother, my grandmother, my sister, and of course my grandfather himself. And this is a very not okay time in our history. I was so devastated because honestly, I was still trying to figure it out. I didn't really know. And so immediately I was terrified and ashamed and panicky and all the things as my grandfather proceeds to tell me that my father's not coming to pick me up. He's decided he's going to leave me there. He used outing me as a way to set me up for failure. Now, luckily, my mom, I mean, it was the 90s and she was less than stellar on accepting my sexual orientation in that moment. But, I immediately realized I wasn't safe. I had no stability. I mean, I wasn't really safe before that, but that was one of the first times all of my stability was gone. Now, I will say I moved around a lot as a kid, so I never really had stability, but as much stability as I could have had, it was gone out the window. And I just remember feeling so devastated, especially because I wasn't going to be able to see my friends anymore. I wasn't going to be able to have the life I had. I didn't have a relationship with my mother, so all of a sudden I'm living with this stranger and her husband, who was not a great dude either. And honestly, I went through hell unnecessarily. All of that because of who I may or may not have been attracted to. And right now, kids all across this country are having to fear being outed, not by a family member or somebody who might actually give a damn about them, but by their schools, for acknowledging that they feel different than their classmates, for acknowledging that they are of a different gender than what other people perceive them to be. And here's the problem with that, because I told you my story, my coming out story about being, about my sexual orientation. But what I need to tell you more about is my coming out story for transitioning, because this is important, especially for what's happening right now. So it took me until I was in my late 20s to even know what the word transgender meant, because in the 80s and 90s, we didn't have that language. We didn't talk about things in the same regard that we do now. And when I first understood what it meant to be trans, I was afraid of it. And I was afraid of it because I knew how other people felt about that word. And I didn't want to be associated with the negative feelings that these folks were having. And so I did everything in my power to not be that person. But here's where things get interesting, right? Because I spent most of my life already knowing my body well enough to know that, like, for the most part, I just got to be like the only boy at girls' nights out, or like, I got to go hang out at slumber parties and all that other stuff. And like, I don't know, girls were, I guess, more comfortable having me around than the typical cis dude, because, I didn't have a penis and they weren't worried about me in that way. Let's be real. Let's name it what it is. At the end of the day, I was perceived as not really being a threat to anybody. But again, I didn't have the language to understand that what was happening with me. There were not stories of what other people were experiencing. So I just felt like I was fucking weird, man, and something was wrong with me. Because that's what society was telling me, and that's what other people liked. That's the kind of thing that other people like to say, and it's just not true. So I saw a documentary on Netflix one day, and I think it was called Queer, or something about being queer. And it was the first time in my life that I heard from trans men about who they were, what they were experiencing, and what what it even meant to be a trans guy. And to be honest with you, I was blown away because I was like, holy shit, that's me. Those are my people. And so I was already in a committed relationship and had been for a couple of years. And when I came out to my partner, she said, yeah, well, if you're trans and you're a dude, we can't be together because I'm a lesbian. Now, her and her 2 kids had become my family in my life, especially in that moment. I didn't have family, not like a loving family that I felt connected to by any means. And so the very real threat of losing what little family I actually had was enough for me to be like, yeah, I guess I'll just wait. I guess I guess I just won't do this thing. I was crushed. I was undeniably devastated, thinking that I was never going to have a chance to explore and figure out who I actually was. Fast forward a little bit further, and one day this partner comes to me. Now I'm about to tell y'all some info. I'm about to tell y'all something a little private, but so anyway, my then partner comes to me one day and says, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" I said, "Yeah, sure. What's up?" She said, why do you have like these little scars down there?" I said, "Scars? What are you talking about?" She said, "Oh, you got some scars." I said, "No, I don't. There's nothing that's ever happened. I don't have any scars down there." She's like, "No, you do." I'm like, "No." So sure enough, I get out my cell phone, put it in selfie mode, and of course I'm doing the, stretching, yoga, gymnastics, whatever, to try to get this angle and see what the hell this woman is possibly talking about. And sure enough, there it is. I got 2 little scars that look like surgical incisions in a very private area that I should not have scars. And immediately, I'm like, what the fuck is this? So I called my father. I said, "Dad, I got to ask you a question. What, this girl found these scars. Like, what's going on?" I said, "I don't know. Ask your mother." I said, "Okay." So I called my mom. I said, "Hey, mommy, I got to ask you a question. I got these weird scars. I'm trying to figure out what it is. What's going on?" She said, "I don't know. Ask your father." I'm like, all right, look, the 2 of you have never said the same thing outside of "I do" and "F you." So I'm calling bullshit. Somebody knows something and something is up, and I want to know what it is. And both of them were like, "No clue. I got no clue what you're talking about." So I'm like, all right. I asked my dad. My dad actually suggested it. He said, "Why don't you call the state and see if you can get a copy of your birth records?" So I make a phone call. I call the state of New York and I said, "Hey, I want to see what I can do to get a copy of my birth records." And the woman who I was talking to asks for all of my info and then proceeds to tell me that for some reason, well, not some reason, apparently it's a storage space issue, but due to a storage space issue, the state of New York has destroyed all of my birth records. Yeah. I'm like, that's a little odd. So call my dad. I'm like, "Hey, I just talked to the state of New York." He said, "Yeah, what'd they say?" So I told him. My dad said, bullshit. They got your records. I mean, I know they've got mine. They got yours. So I said, "Call him yourself, man." So we do. We call. He actually called on 3-way and had me on the other line. So I'm listening, and he says, "Hey, I wanted to see if you all have a copy of my birth records, blah, blah." They said, "Yes, we sure do." He said, "Okay, now I want to ask you a question. I also need to get a copy of my kids' records. Can you tell me if you've got that?" The woman said, "Oh, no, we don't. I'm so sorry." He said, "What do you mean you don't have my kids' records?" It said, "Due to a storage space issue," literally back to the storage bullshit, "those records were destroyed." Look, I'm going to tell y'all right now. In that moment, I realized there was something more to the story. And I also had the awareness and the realization that, my entire life, I never once thought of myself. Like when I thought of myself as like getting old, I always saw myself as like this old man. I never once saw myself as like, oh, I'm going to be a little old lady. Like, get the fuck. No, that wasn't me. Fast forward a little bit further, because honestly, in that moment, I just really was like, all right, something's up. I got to figure out more of this. So it took a couple of years before I finally got health insurance, because I spent most of my life broke, homeless, living out of my backpack, just bouncing around from couch to couch, relationships, whatever, just trying to survive, to be honest with you. So anyway, I finally get to a place where I decide I'm going to start my transition, and I venture out into the world. So I'm out here, I'm hustling, I'm moving, I'm grooving, I'm bouncing around. I finally, was like in North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, back and forth for like an entire summer. It was like 2012. And most of the time I got to spend with my best friend who was in Atlanta, which was amazing because I really would not have had a stable or safe place to just go and think without her. So shout out to you, Caroline. Anyway, yeah. So as I am trying to figure all this stuff out, I ended up moving to Knoxville, Tennessee, of all places. Which I thought I was a little too brown and a little too trans for, but ended up making Knoxville, Tennessee my home. So I started out working a bunch of odd jobs, got in with a restaurant, ditched the restaurant and got in with AutoZone, got my way into a job fair with a company, for-profit retailer, like online retailer that sells jewelry and gemstones, and found myself in a situation where I finally, for the first time in my adult life at 34 years old, finally had access to health insurance. Yay! Y'all, I was stoked. I was so stoked to figure out what was going on with me and my body, especially because I just always was so different than everybody else, and I knew it. So yeah, so I start seeing they actually had a nurse practitioner on site. So I had a coworker who came up to me one day and was like, "Man, that nurse out there just put me on testosterone." And I was like, "Really?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what was that for?" He said, "Well, because I'm just tired all the time. I'm depressed, like I'm just dragging lately." I said, "That sounds like my everyday." And he actually was the one to suggest that I go get my hormone levels checked. So I go to the nurse practitioner, tell her about my interest in transitioning. We do the hormone check. And when I went back in for the results, she's like very weird with me. And she's like, "Hey, I need to ask you a question." And this is a serious question. I'm like, "Yeah, what's up?" She's like, "Are you already on testosterone? Have you done anything to increase your testosterone levels?" And I was like, "I mean, outside of taking a men's multivitamin every day, no. That's why I'm here to see you." And this lady looks at me and says, "Well, then I can't help you because I think you have cancer." I was like, "What? What do you mean I have cancer?" How that escalated quickly. So she made sure that I went and got checked for several different types of cancer, because she said it was impossible for me to have the numbers that I did naturally. What she meant was, according to white supremacy's version of what male and female are, I did not fit the mold. So typically, I mean, I don't know if y'all know this, but everybody has testosterone, everybody has estrogen. We just have different levels of this stuff because it's a spectrum. But anyway, the spectrum that showed up for me was that I was on the very low end of testosterone for a cisgender male. And if you don't know what it means to be a cis male, it means that the doctor pulled you out of your mom and said, hey, congratulations, it's a boy. And as you grew up, you said, yeah, I'm a dude. If you did not feel that way, then you might be a part of the trans community, but that's basically the difference between us, right? So the doctor pulled me out and said, hey, it's a girl, and was so wrong. I am a part of the gender spectrum. Yeah. I'm not one of the two boxes that are normally on a form. And because of that, now I have to deal with more death threats, less access to health care, more instances of violence and aggression and oppression and all the things just to get through the day. So yeah, I didn't ask for that. I really didn't ask for any of that. So during this time that I was trying to figure out my own identity and all that other stuff, my mom randomly called me one day and said, oh my God, you know what I just remembered? I said, no. She said, when I was pregnant, the doctor said to me, oh, congratulations, you're pregnant. Do you want to have a little girl or a little boy? And she said, oh, I want to have a little girl. And the doctor said, cool, well, here's some pink vitamins. You can take these. I said, well, what in the hell was that? She said, I don't know, some kind of vitamin. And I said, so if you don't know what it was, why did you take it? She said, I don't know, it was the 70s. My doctor told me to take it. I took it. She said, they did the same thing with your sister. When I was pregnant with her, they said the same thing, and I had to take those pills, so I didn't think anything of it. Y'all, I don't know how far now you got to dig into Google, but years ago, I found a really crazy article about gender swaying and the experiments that were being conducted in this country on gender swaying to see if could experiment and see what would cause a boy or a girl to form in the womb. And what's even worse is that, as I mentioned, I was getting health insurance, so I started getting all these things checked out. I've had chronic pain my entire life. I actually have multiple disabilities. If you see me doing this little motion on the screen, it's because I actually a version of Tourette's that causes twitchiness, which drives me a little crazy, and several other things. But one of the things that I've always had trouble with is my feet and my ankles. They hurt so bad all the time. So as I'm getting checked out, the new girlfriend that I was with says, tell them about your fucked up feet. So I talked to the doctor about all the pain and stuff I was dealing with. She sent me to a podiatrist. As I'm working with this podiatrist, I find out that I've actually got a ton of issues wrong. Basically going from down, starting with my ankles all the way down, right? So 2 out of 3 of the bones in both of my ankles have been fused together. They never separated in the womb. This change happened. So everybody, I don't know if y'all know this. I didn't know this until I did that session with the doctor, but apparently as you're a child and your bones are forming and all that stuff, your ankle bones will separate and you get 3 separate bones that make up your ankle. I have 2 because 2 out of 3 of the bones in both of my ankles are fused together and never separated. That's also around the time period where your gender begins to change or not in the womb. On top of that, I started to realize that a lot of what has been wrong with me since childhood goes back to whatever that was that disrupted my development. But now I am a criminal, essentially, for existing. I guess white supremacy doesn't like to be reminded of their mistakes, eh? But that's the thing, is that gender itself is, in fact, a spectrum. Nobody even had to do anything to my development for me to be intersex. But because we have been taught to believe that there's just two ways of being. 9 billion people on this planet, and there's just two boxes for all of us. Because that has been so ingrained in our culture, now we got a bunch of people out there who claim to be good people and maybe in other instances are in fact good people. But we have all these people who are now running around trying to stomp out trans people from existing. And we can't keep doing that, man. Like I said, National Coming Out Day is coming up very soon. And it's really sad and tragic to me that this year in 2024, that more people cannot truly embrace their own identities. When you hear stories of detransitioning, most of the time that's coming from societal pressure, from people around this trans person telling them and showing them they were not safe to be who they actually were. I mean, like I said, gender is a spectrum, right? So if you're on this side and you're feeling a little bit more masculine, or maybe you're on this side and you're more feminine, so maybe you're like, I can just get through it. I don't have to transition, right? So some of those folks are like, it's better and easier for me to just not. There's also a lot of people who can't actually take hormones, or don't want hormones, or can't have surgery, or don't want surgery. All of them are valid. They're all very valid in their existence as trans people, as people. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is people who are part of the LGBTQIA community, especially people who are trans and intersex, we start getting so much hate and keep getting isolated and pushed away and pushed away and pushed away, that sometimes, especially in my case, it causes us to end up in really, really messed up situations. I personally have been the victim of domestic violence in ways that nobody should ever have to be. I remember one time this girl who wasn't quite out of the closet that I was dating. In fact, I was living with this girl down in Miami, and it was like Mother's Day or Father's Day or something, and she was going to go do some stuff with her family, but one of her siblings was coming over to pick her up, and she made me hide in a shower so that her brother wouldn't know that I was there. And before she left, it was really weird. We got into this crazy argument about there was a movie that I had rented because she was going to be gone all day. I couldn't go with her. Nobody knew I existed. I was just her little secret. And so I rented a movie, and she threw a fit that I was going to be watching this movie without her. And it escalated. And you know what? It got so ridiculously violent that it led to me having a head injury. And I was with her for a pretty substantial amount of time before I finally found my freedom. And, you know, it happens so easily and so fast for people, especially when we are in vulnerable situations and we open ourselves up and we expose some of that hurt, and we think we have somebody who's safe, and so we trust them and we tell them what's happened, and only to find our hurt and our pain being exploited. Trans people, queer people, members of the LGBTQIA across the spectrum are very prone to dealing with situations of domestic violence. And we as a society need to stop. This is the time for all of us to focus on our healing so that we can be better people for ourselves and each other. Which is actually part of why I'm doing this podcast to begin with, is because I have my own healing that needs to happen. I've got a lot of stories that I'm going to share with you all, and I'm hoping that these stories will lead to some positive change so that we can really make this world better. Not just for me, but for everybody. And For me, I do believe that the only way that we're really going to get to that truly inclusive and equitable future is if we start to build new solutions, new programs, new structures, new relationships, and we start prioritizing the lives of disabled, two-spirit, trans, intersex, and gender-expansive community members who are also Black, Indigenous, and/or people of color. And the reason for that is because to TIGE BIPOC folks, we are, especially those who are disabled, are the most marginalized of communities. So when you start to solve all of the inequities and all of the systemic abuses and all of the things for this community, you actually solve it for everybody. So I encourage you to stay tuned and to make sure that you like, subscribe, share, whatever you got to do to my podcast so that together we can start to figure out how to get to that equitable future. I want to see less members of the LGBTQIA community dealing with violence, and especially the mental health crisis that's happening because of all the increased attacks. Because look, let me tell you right now, this is October. I am recording this on October 5th, and there have already been over 638 anti-trans bills introduced across the United States since January. In 10 months, 63 bills a month have been coming out. That's 2 a day to try to criminalize and police the existence of trans people. Doing everything from policing kids and their pronoun use to policing bathrooms and sports. And the thing is, it's just lie after lie. And when the first lie doesn't work, then they spin the next story, and then the next story, and then the next story. But you know what? When you start to pull at the threads and you unravel the bullshit, you start to see that it was smoke and mirrors and it was bullshit. The attacks against trans lives are very, very unwarranted. And I really hope that as I do this podcast, as you all make it through the day, every day, you start to connect with more content creators who are members of the trans community, and you start to learn the truth about gender and the amount of violence that this entire community is being subjected to. It is mind-numbing when you start to really understand what is happening and on how big of a scale. So again, I invite you to join me as I take this journey, partially again for my mental health and my physical health, but also as we all work together to just be better, to create some actual positive change in this world, and to build that future that we all deserve to have, one where we all get to thrive. So thanks for watching. Talk to you soon.